I just like to tell you a story that may really interest you. My granddaughter, who's now 12, attends an Anglican girls' school in the southeast of Melbourne. 2.5 years ago, as she was about to go into grade 4, she said, "Oh, Ma, I need to talk to you about something." And I said, "That's fine, okay, let's go and sit down." And she said, I need to talk to you about God and Jesus and Father Christmas. I said, "Okay, well, shall we start with God?" Because you mentioned God first. And she said, "Yes, I know you won't be pleased, but I don't believe in God anymore." And bear in mind, she's at a church school. "Why don't you believe in God, Hannah?" "I don't believe any man would sit up in the sky on a throne with a crown on his head." Now, she didn't get that from her parents and she didn't get it from me. That has to have been from school. So anyhow, I told her that and I said, "Well, I don't really believe in that God either." And then she said, I said, "What about Jesus?" "I believe in Jesus, the man, and that if all men, all people, could try hard to be like that, then we would be in a happier world." I said, "What about Father Christmas?" "Oh, I believe in him."
He's obviously real. He brings gifts at Christmas time.
But to me, that made a change in my direction. It made a change in my direction too. I'd been thinking broadly, but that really narrowed it down because I thought she's talked to me about that. I now have to be responsible and bring it up again, which I've done. The next year it was, Anna, as we walked along the suburban street getting our afternoon tea. I think that, we talked about God and Jesus, I suggest. I think that's like Miley Cyrus and Hannah Montana. Do you remember Miley Cyrus and Hannah Montana? Right?
Not enough to get the drift.
Miley Cyrus is an actual actress.
Right, yes.
And her alter ego is Hannah Montana.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
And I thought, that makes sense when she was then 10, and that really made sense. So we've had other little conversations. But it seemed to me so much more real. The church, it seems, has not advanced with the times. We're still stuck with what we were given, and that probably is fair enough. 2,000 years ago, we haven't grown with that.
Yep, and yet, as I said, in so many other areas of life, all the rules have changed.
Yes.
And even what we think it means to be human. What's the point of being alive? It's totally changed. So if we no longer think of humans the same way, we can't think of God the same way, and we can't think of Jesus. I mean, I like the phrase Jesus as the human face of God, perhaps better, a human face of God. I'm quite often challenged, but people say, "Do you believe Jesus is the Son of God?" And I'll say, "Well, let's start with the God word. Let's agree what we mean by God, and then we'll figure out what we mean by son of," and because they lose interest, because I'm obviously not going to jump through their hoop and self-immolate straight away. Gregory,
you're welcome at viewing any time. You said you didn't think your last slide would provoke anything. Not that it provoked anything really, but I was going to ask, the question is, I'm having lots of thoughts, and so I'll try and make them out loud, but the primary one is the idea of the Spirit, the importance of talking about the Spirit of Jesus. And I was interested in that in the context of the Trinity, which seems to talk about the Spirit as a person as opposed to the Spirit of Jesus. And the idea that Paul talks not about the Spirit of Jesus as such, but so the things that you listed, compassion, humility, joy, etc., which Paul talks about being, in a sense, fruits of the Spirit, and he doesn't refer to them as the fruits of the Spirit of Jesus. So there's this sense in which there's the Spirit as separate as a, and I know I was reminded of that movie, The Last Temptation of Christ, which I'm not sure how many people would have seen, but there's this wonderful scene where Paul's preaching, and of course the temptation is that Jesus comes down off the cross and goes to live with Mary and Martha, and he's walking through the marketplace, and St. Paul's preaching about the risen Jesus, and Jesus goes up to Paul and says, "But Paul, it's me," and Paul says, "I don't care, I'm still preaching this." So there's this sense about there's a different movement, it seems to me as well, and which also has a question mark for me about the importance, or perhaps the over-importance sometimes, of the need for a historical Jesus in the context of Christianity being a religion amongst other religions of the Spirit as opposed to of the historical Jesus. So that's a bit of a blur of thoughts in response to that last slide.
Yep,
You might want to make a response to it.
Sure.
Particularly around the person of the Spirit as opposed to the Spirit of Jesus.
Yeah. Well, let me start just slightly earlier back. When I wrote in the Spirit of Jesus, I was not thinking of capital S Spirit. I was meaning in the mindset of Jesus, in the values of Jesus, okay, that kind of thing, in the spirit of the thing, as it were. And for that, I think we need the historical Jesus, because we need to tease out the canonical New Testament gospel portraits of Jesus, and to the extent that we may be able to try and get a sense, because of his Jewishness and because of his historical situation and the things he most probably did say or did do, get a sense of where he was coming from. That's what I mean by in the Spirit of Jesus. Having said all that, and go to the other extreme and say I'm really not all that interested in Trinitarian formulae, because I see them as 4th, 5th century attempts to pin the God experience down into Greek philosophical categories and then use that as to decide who's in and who's out in terms of dividing up the perks of office when the church gets into power. So I have a critique of kind of the historical development of Trinitarian formulae. I would be very happy to, of course, affirm that our Christian experience is diverse and Trinitarian, and sometimes we talk about creation, and sometimes we talk about incarnation, and sometimes immanence, and sometimes we talk about spirit. But I'm not. If I'm not interested in life after death, it's perhaps a good thing that I'm not particularly interested in getting the Trinity right either. I have colleagues who spend their life doing that, and good luck to them. I have enough trouble with the coins of Bethsaida, let alone the persons of the Trinity. So I guess I just sit lightly to a lot of that stuff, and for me it's not, the heart of my identity of being Christian is Jesus and the community of people who make sense of life in light of Jesus. That's the guts of my Christianity, and the rest is, for me, is icing on the cake, fine tuning, trying to get all the ticky tape right. Coming back to the middle, before I get charged with too much heresy, I actually think Paul does identify and speak explicitly about the Spirit as the Spirit of the Lord, the Spirit of Jesus. And I think Paul moves backwards and forwards between, and this is partly why we get drawn into Trinitarian language, because Paul does talk about, the first Adam became a life-giving spirit. And he talks about where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. And Romans chapter 8 and so on, yes, it's about the Spirit, but it's the Spirit of God at work in Jesus and in us. And so I'm not sure that Paul, well, I am quite sure Paul did not have Nicene Trinitarian theological categories. He's working with raw data and making it up as he goes along, like I am at the moment, and trying to kind of, make sense of it and talk in a reasonable way to his recipients of his letters, who must have wondered sometimes, what on earth is Paul talking about? So I wouldn't distinguish so clearly between the Spirit of Jesus and the Spirit, as in number 3 in the Trinity. And of course, to the extent that I understand my systematic colleagues, they don't mean person in anything like the way we use person in today's language. So there's a whole language game involved in Trinitarian theological talk. And I'm happy just to be a simple Bible Christian, really. Turn the hands are going up.
You made an important speculation about whether Jesus was literally or not, and the question is involved in a bit more informed speculation as to whether there would have been a synagogue in the supposed Nazareth at the time.
Okay, I think we can say pretty clearly there would not have been a synagogue. In fact, I thought I firstly said that towards the end of the first session, that They may have had a shared oven and a shared threshing floor, but there wouldn't have been any reason to build a synagogue at such a primitive state of the village's development. Yeah. So now, of course, we don't know that for sure, but I would think it's improbable that Nazareth had a synagogue, as in synagogue building. It doesn't say 10 guys didn't stand in a circle under a tree and say prayers together, which is what synagogue actually means. Even in Josephus, it says he goes around, he's talking to all the synagogues of the villages around Sepphoris. What he means is he didn't go to their Saturday night service, he went to their village council, the synagogue, and tried to get them to join the revolt. And they refused to join. So the synagogues of the villages around Sepphoris were not buildings, they were meetings. So, yeah. But I'd love to know a lot more of the detail. Not because it matters spiritually and so on, but because I'm inquisitive.
Thanks, Rick. You're among people who feel the same way as you, and thank you for reinforcing and giving us good advice. The issue, I guess, for me is these people will sit in a church service, if they do, uncomfortably because it's representing things of the old Christendom type and wishing it could change. The United Church, of which I'm a member, is looking at what its strategy for the future in the 21st century might be, and has identified leadership as one of those critical issues. So are you able to cast a mind as to whether the church is capable of developing leadership that might move it into the 21st century along the lines that you are indicating and that we are supporting? Or are we going to be stuck in the past model because that's too difficult to change or too uncomfortable to change, or there's not enough leadership to change, or we maybe can't cope with the diversity of views? Any advice?
Well, it's good that Anglicans don't have any of those problems. Yeah. I think we are indeed living at a most interesting time in church history, Christian history, and indeed human history. I suspect the churches will actually get more conservative rather than less conservative in the next few decades, I think. Our leaders will look at what works, which is give them what they want, make them feel safe, assure them, aren't doing it already, well, there'll be less diversity, there'll be less scope for people like me to break the rules. And none of us will bother going. Yeah. So I think that's one of the dynamics. So there's another bigger dynamic, which is the tide of history. And whether it's dioceses, churches being bankrupted with child abuse, sex claims, or whether it's just property after property becoming redundant and empty and so on. I mean, there is a huge challenge underway. And we need to encourage communities of resistance and imagination and networks where that can happen. Now, my wife and I paid up members of St Mary's in Exile, for instance. Now, Eve was a member of that congregation long before it went into exile. But it's difficult to be church, outside the structures of church, even in terms of legal protection and structures and you name it, leadership, succession, property, all kinds of things. I think we're going into a period of serious challenge. Most of the churches we won't be around to worry about it in 50 years' time, but most of the churches that will have labels out the front saying Christian church in 50 years' time probably wouldn't want us sitting in their pews, and certainly not in leadership roles in their organisation. And that actually may be one of the best things that happens to the Jesus tradition. Okay, might have to operate outside of the church, and already is, of course. So no, other than just keeping the networks going, I love one of the quotes I really, really love from Elizabeth Johnson. She talks about the church as place where the community where the dangerous memory of what Jesus started is kept alive. No, keeps alive the dangerous memory of Jesus, and that the church, the role of the church is to basically finish the job, complete the job that Jesus began, but which has not been worked on for a while, is the implication. You know? And so that means where we can, engaging in leadership, offering programs. I mean, my role as academic dean, biblical studies lecturer, is to try to encourage my students, almost all of whom are way more conservative than me, to kind of read the scriptures with imagination and with openness to the realities of the context they're living in, and not to only read the scriptures through the lens of the creed or the prayer book or whatever, and see what comes.
Greg, I know that there are probably a lot of people here who are thinking of more questions. Yeah, right? Sorry, but we try very hard to stick to our time limits. So we had come to the end of questions. It seems to me what you've been saying all along is we certainly in the churches, people in the churches, all sorts of churches say we've reached the end of Christendom. But they're still holding on to the theology of Christendom. And so, there's this contradiction where we're past Christendom, but we've still got the theology of Christendom. And I think all of us today would agree. We want to thank you so much for conducting us, first of all, into the world of your studies, your archaeological dig, and all that means, and all that's coming out of that, and your work in that regard, and also in this last session, to say so many things that so many of us are feeling. And it's great to hear it from you, to hear it fresh from you, and to hear it put so eloquently. So I want very much to thank you for myself, but I know that everyone else here will want to be thankful for what we've heard this afternoon. So would you like to...